The crash. Cryer's arm burned in agony as his bones splintered through flesh, ripping his skin into a mangled mess of blood, meat, and bone shards that no human could survive. The acrid stench of melted plastic and charred skin saturated the cockpit of his crashed ship. He was pinned in the wreckage, helpless. He knew the alien bastards that shot him down were coming to finish the job. They'd gloat over his mutilated corpse. Cryler just hoped the auto-destruct would vaporize their arrogant faces when they cracked open the hull. The cockpit doors screeched open. Cryler tensed, biting back a scream as the movement jostled his ruined body. But instead of his enemy, a tentative gray hand reached through the doorway. The hand had 4 long fingers and smooth skin. It wasn't his attackers. "Help," Cryler croaked through bloody lips. Maybe these new aliens were friendly. If not, at least the destruct would claim a few more bastards with him. 4 big black eyes blinked at him from a slender face as an alien peered in. It made a trilling sound, then called to others. Gentle hands pried Cryler out of the twisted metal. As they lifted him onto a stretcher, shattered ribs punctured his lungs. He gasped for air that wouldn't come. His vision tunneled. "I'm dead," he thought in despair. Captain Cryler Reeves died before learning his unique biology would change the galaxy's fate. The awakening. Cryler's eyes cracked open. His skin itched as newly regenerated nerve endings fired off phantom sensations. He groaned and tried to rub his face, only to find that his arms were strapped down. A Xerian doctor rushed over, making chirping noises that Cryler's translator implant deciphered. "Please do not move. Your body is still healing." Cryler tested his restraints, finding that he could barely budge. He relented with a sigh. "What happened to me, Doc? How long was I out?" "You crashed on our planet a week ago. We had to place you in a medical coma so that your body could recover from its extensive injuries," the doctor said, pulling up a holographic display of Cryler's X-rays. "Both arms fractured, 24 broken ribs, punctured lungs, ruptured spleen, 3rd-degree burns." "I get the picture," Cryler said, cutting him off. "I'm sure you did what you could. Thanks for patching me up." The doctor twisted his hands together. "We almost didn't. Your wounds were so severe that we thought you would die in surgery. It was a miracle that you survived at all." Cryler shrugged, then winced at the movement. "I'm tougher than I look. Humans are a hardy bunch. I have never seen a species able to regenerate like you did. It was as if your very cells knitted themselves back together," the doctor said, suddenly perking up. "Ah, but you must be famished. I will send for a meal at once." The debrief. An hour later, Cryler was propped up in bed, taking measured sips of a nutrient shake, while a Xerian officer debriefed him. He had introduced himself as Commander Zoller, and his posture was rigid as he stood at Cryler's bedside. "I must first express our deepest regrets for the actions that led to your ship's destruction," Zoller said. "We are in the midst of a war against the Khadarian. Your vessel had the misfortune of entering our contested space." Cryler waved a hand. "I read about the Khadarian in the Federation's databanks. Nasty pieces of work. I'm guessing they were the ones that shot me down." "Yes, the Khadarian are a brutal conquering race. They have been encroaching on our territories for months now." Zoller's shoulders slumped. "I'm afraid that we are losing. They have superior weaponry and numbers. It is only a matter of time before they overwhelm our defenses entirely." "That's rough," Cryler said. He had seen the effects of the war for himself in the scorch marks on the buildings outside his window. "I wish there was some way I could help." Zoller clicked his mandibles together. "That is kind of you to say, but we could not possibly ask you to fight our battles. You are still recovering." "I mean it," Cryler said, sitting up straighter. "You saved my life. The least I can do is return the favor. I appreciate the sentiment, but it would be too dangerous. The Khadarian would not hesitate to kill you." Cryler met Zoller's gaze. "I have a feeling they would be in for a surprise if they tried. Remember how I healed from those injuries. I'm essentially immortal." Zoller's eyes widened. "You cannot die." Oh, I can die. It just doesn't stick. Kryler flexed his newly regenerated fingers. I'll always come back good as new. So you see, I'm the perfect soldier for your fight. This is a lot to take in, Zoller said, his voice shaking. I must discuss this with my superiors, but if what you say is true, then you could be the key to our survival. Kryler grinned. Just point me at the Kadarian. I'll show them what happens when you mess with humanity's allies. The training. Kryler stood in front of a group of Xyrian soldiers, his stance wide, and his expression serious. All right, listen up. The Kadarian may have bigger guns, but we've got something they don't. The element of surprise. They won't be expecting us to use human tactics. He picked up one of the new hybrid weapons, a sleek rifle that combined Xyrian energy technology with human ballistics. This baby packs a punch. It's got the stopping power of a railgun, but with the rapid fire of a plasma rifle. We'll use these to punch through their armor. The soldiers murmured to each other, mandibles clicking in excitement. Kryler had been working with them for weeks, teaching them how to fight like humans. They practiced taking cover, flanking maneuvers, and close-quarters combat. The Xyrians were quick learners, and soon they moved like a well-oiled machine. Their skills were put to the test when the Kadarian launched a massive offensive on the Xyrian capital. The city was in chaos, buildings crumbling under the onslaught of enemy fire. Kryler led his squad to the front lines, weaving through the rubble with practiced ease. Flank left, he shouted, firing his rifle at a group of Kadarian soldiers. The hybrid rounds tore through their armor like tissue paper, sending them sprawling to the ground. A Kadarian tank rumbled down the street, its cannon aimed directly at Kryler. He dove to the side just as it fired, the blast searing the air where he'd been standing. Kryler rolled to his feet and sprinted towards the tank, dodging its shots with inhuman speed. He leaped onto the tank's hull and ripped open the hatch, tossing in a grenade. The explosion rocked the tank, flames billowing from its seams. Kryler jumped clear just as it burst apart, raining shrapnel down on the Kadarian soldiers nearby. The revelation. But the victory was short-lived. A hail of laser fire stitched across Kryler's chest, burning through his armor and flesh. He fell to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. The Kadarian advanced, their weapons trained on his prone form. Foolish human, one of them snarled. Did you really think you could defeat us? Kryler coughed, blood splattering his lips. I don't have to beat you, I just have to outlast you. With a pained grunt, he pushed himself to his feet. The Kadarian stepped back in shock as Kryler's wounds began to close, flesh knitting back together before their eyes. He picked up his rifle and grinned, the blood on his teeth making him look feral. Round 2. What followed was a blur of violence and death. Kryler fought like a man possessed, shrugging off wounds that would have killed the lesser being. Laser blasts burned holes in his body only to seal shut moments later. He was a whirlwind of destruction, cutting through the Kadarian, ranks like a scythe through wheat. The Xyrian rallied behind him, their fear turning to awe as they watched Kryler defy death again and again. They pushed forward, the hybrid weapons proving devastatingly effective against the Kadarian armor. The air was filled with the screams of the dying and the acrid stench of burning flesh. In the end, the Kadarian were forced to retreat, their numbers decimated by Kryler's one-man army. The Xyrian cheered as the enemy ships fled, their voices raised in a triumphant chorus. Kryler collapsed to his knees, his body riddled with wounds, but even as the Xyrian rushed to his aid, they could see the injuries already beginning to heal. Kryler looked up at them and smiled, his teeth stained red. I told you I could do this all day. The Emperor's plan continued. Existence terrified them. But for Kryler, it was just another day in the life of an immortal soldier. He knew that the war was far from over and that the Kadarian would be back with a vengeance. But he also knew that he would be there to meet them, ready to lay down his life again and again in defense of his new allies. After all, what good was immortality if you couldn't use it to kick some ass? The Khadarian Emperor slammed his fist on the table. The force of the blow rattled the holographic display, distorting the image of Kryler cutting through seas of Khadarian soldiers. "This cannot continue," the Emperor snarled. "One man cannot be allowed to turn the tide of a war." General Zork nodded, his face grim. "Agreed, my lord. The human's regenerative abilities make him nigh unstoppable on the battlefield. He inspires hope in the Zirian and fear in our own troops." "Then we must capture him," the Emperor said. "Imagine if we could harness his power for ourselves. An army of immortal Khadarian warriors would be invincible." Zork's mandibles twitched. "It will not be easy. The human has proven elusive." The Emperor waved a dismissive hand. "I have faith in your abilities, General. Assemble a team of your best warriors and scientists. Devise a plan to bring the human in alive by any means necessary." "As you command, my lord." Zork bowed deeply. "I will not fail you." The ambush. Kryler crept through the shadows of the Khadarian supply base, his rifle at the ready. Beside him, a squad of Zirian elite soldiers moved with silent precision. They had received intel that the base contained valuable information on Khadarian troop movements, and Kryler had volunteered to lead the covert mission to retrieve it. As they approached the central command building, a flicker of movement caught Kryler's eye. He held up a fist, signaling for the squad to halt. "Something's not right," he whispered. "It's too quiet." Suddenly, a hail of laser fire erupted from the shadows. Kryler dove for cover, yanking the Zirian soldier with him. "Ambush," he yelled. The squad scattered, returning fire as best they could, but the Khadarians seemed to be everywhere, pouring out of buildings and from behind crates. Kryler took aim at a group of soldiers only to have his rifle wrenched from his hands by an unseen force. He turned to see a Khadarian wielding a strange weapon, its barrel glowing with an eerie blue light. Kryler felt a sudden wave of weakness wash over him, as if his very life force was being drained away. He stumbled, his regenerative powers failing him for the first time. "Stasis weapons," he gasped. "They're neutralizing my abilities." The Zirian fought bravely, but they were outmatched and outgunned. One by one, they fell to the Khadarian onslaught. Kryler struggled to his feet, determined to fight to the last. He charged at the nearest Khadarian, only to be struck by a stasis blast that sent him crashing to the ground. As darkness closed in around him, Kryler heard the Khadarian commander giving orders. "Take the human alive. The Emperor has plans for him." The lag. Kryler awoke to a world of pain. He was strapped to a metal table, his wrists and ankles bound by energy shackles. The room around him was a blur of harsh lights and gleaming instruments, the air thick with the stench of chemicals. A Khadarian scientist loomed over him, its eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and malice. "Fascinating," it said, prodding at Kryler's chest with a scalpel. "Your body is already attempting to heal itself, even under the effects of the stasis field." Kryler gritted his teeth, refusing to give the Khadarian the satisfaction of hearing him scream. "Go to hell," he spat. The scientist chuckled. "Oh, we have no intention of killing you, human. At least not yet. First, we will discover the secret of your immortality. Imagine an army of Khadarian soldiers who cannot die, cannot be stopped. Your power will be our key to conquering the galaxy." "You're insane if you think I'll help you," Kryler said. "You misunderstand," the scientist said. "We don't need your cooperation, only your body." It picked up a wicked-looking device, its surface studded with needles and blades. "Now let us begin. This may hurt a bit." Kryler's screams echoed through the halls of the research facility as the Khadarian began their grim work. They cut and prodded and injected, pushing his regenerative abilities to their limits. Kryler lost count of the number of times he died on that table, only to be brought back to suffer again. But even in his darkest moments, he clung to the hope that his Zirian allies would come for him. He had to believe that they wouldn't abandon him to this fate, that they would move heaven and earth to bring him home. He just hoped they would find him before the Khadarian unlocked the secret of his powers and used them to conquer the galaxy. The rescue. The Xerian command center was in chaos. Reports flooded in from every corner of the planet, each one more dire than the last. The Khadarian had launched a massive offensive, their forces emboldened by the capture of Kryler. Without the immortal human to lead the charge, the Xerian defenses were crumbling. Commander Zoran slammed his fist on the table, his eyes blazing with determination. "We cannot let this stand," he growled. "Kryler risked everything to help us. We must do the same for him." The other officers nodded in agreement, their faces grim. They knew that a rescue mission would be dangerous, perhaps even suicidal, but they also knew that they owed Kryler a debt that could never be repaid. "I will lead the mission myself," Zoran said. "I need our best soldiers, those who have fought alongside Kryler and know his tactics. We will infiltrate the Khadarian research facility and bring our friend home." As the rescue team prepared for their mission, the situation on the front lines grew increasingly desperate. The Khadarian pushed forward, their weapons cutting through the Xerian ranks like a scythe through wheat. The soldiers fought bravely, but without Kryler's leadership and regenerative powers, they were outmatched. Zoran and his team moved silently through the shadows of the Khadarian facility, their weapons at the ready. They had studied the layout of the building and knew that Kryler was being held in the central laboratory, but getting to him would not be easy. As they approached the lab, a shrill alarm pierced the air. The Khadarian had discovered their presence. Zoran cursed under his breath and motioned for his team to take cover. They would have to fight their way through. The door to the lab exploded inward, and Zoran charged through the smoke and debris. He saw Kryler strapped to a metal table, his body broken and bleeding. The sight of his friend in such a state filled Zoran with rage, and he let out a battle cry as he opened fire on the Khadarian guards. The lab erupted into chaos, laser blasts and explosions filling the air. Zoran's team fought with desperate ferocity, their weapons tearing through the Khadarian ranks. But more and more enemies poured into the room, threatening to overwhelm them. Suddenly, a figure rose from the metal table, his eyes blazing with an otherworldly light. It was Kryler, his wounds healing before their eyes. He ripped the restraints from his wrists and ankles, his strength returning with every passing moment. "About time you showed up," Kryler said, his voice rough with pain and exhaustion. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me." Zoran tossed him a rifle, a grim smile on his face. "Never, my friend. Now let's show these bastards what happens when you mess with the Xerian." Together, Kryler and Zoran fought their way out of the lab, their weapons blazing. The Khadarian fell before them, their ranks thinning with every passing moment. The rest of the rescue team rallied behind them, their spirits lifted by the sight of their immortal ally back in the fight. As they burst out of the facility and into the open air, Kryler turned to Zoran, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "I owe you my life." Zoran clasped his hand, his grip firm. "You owe us nothing, Kryler. You have already given us hope and a chance at victory. Now let us finish this war and bring peace to our people." The final battle. Word of Kryler's rescue spread quickly, and the Xerian forces rallied behind their immortal hero. With Kryler back in the fight, the tide of the war began to turn. The Khadarian were pushed back, their ranks thinning with every battle. But Kryler knew that the war was far from over. The Khadarian emperor was still out there, his armies vast and his ambition boundless. To truly end this conflict, they would need to confront the emperor himself and bring an end to his reign of terror. As the Xerian forces pushed towards the Khadarian capital, Kryler and Zoran stood side by side, their weapons at the ready. They knew that the final battle would be the hardest yet, but they also knew that they had each other and the strength of their allies behind them.